Hello guys, welcome to my channel, Confessions of an Avoidant. My name is Wando and this channel is all about talking about attachment from the perspective of someone who is avoidant. I love talking about attachment, and in this video I want to talk about Miles, emotionally unavailable Miles from Made in Chelsea. I love reality TV so much because it allows us to perform a case study, essentially, of certain characters' behaviors, patterns of their behaviors, or maladaptive behaviors, over time. And I feel like recently with Miles, a lot of his romantic storylines, romantic interests, whether with Inga, with Yasmin, with Izzy, and now we have LMA Ding, who's come from Married at First Sight, we're really starting to... Well, I've already been seeing them. I'm sure a lot of fans have already seen them, but it's becoming more and more clear that Miles has these very avoidant patterns of behaviors when it comes to romance. And of course, I'm speculating here. So with Miles, I wanted to talk about 5 specific patterns I noticed with him that are very consistent with avoidant attachment. So number 1, going very long periods of time without a serious relationship, having short-lived flings, or no flings at all, and being completely oblivious to the fact that you are avoidant. Allegedly, supposedly, I'm speculating. So Miles is the only main character who is currently on the show that's never had a serious relationship on the show. He's been on the show since 2018, and he's had a number of different romantic interests to drive storyline to the show because it's important for the show, or like other cast members on the show. He's never had a relationship off the show where that romantic interest joined the show because they were dating him off the show. Now there was Maeva, who it seems like they had some sort of long distance relationship with, and she eventually joined the show, but she didn't join the show as his official girlfriend. It was clear that they were broken up and there was some miscommunication. And it was also a long distance relationship, which I'm going to talk about in point number 5, avoidant people and these long distance relationships or online courtships. But unlike the rest of the cast members who have some sort of emotional availability or some percentage of codependence or interdependence to them, with Miles, in his 4 to 5 years of being on the show, we haven't seen him advance past 2 to 3 weeks tops of having a particular love interest in having a particular storyline with a girl. So I'm going to move on to point number 2, but I just want to say quickly that I find this frustrating because the whole point of reality TV is you have to drive storyline for the show. And particularly with Made in Chelsea, I find it frustrating because a lot of times they'll bring women onto the show, they'll introduce a female character, maybe she'll go on a date with one of the male characters, and if there's no romantic connection that sparks from that, then she's basically gone from the show. You know, we've just seen that with Willow. We saw that with the girl that Miles went on a date with in Mallorca. We see this all the time. Whereas, you know, it happens with men too, but I feel like the shelf life for introducing a female character is shorter. So it's like, you better drive that romantic storyline or else. And so I guess I get kind of frustrated with Miles because for years, he hasn't driven any romantic storyline and there's no consequence for it. Yeah, he essentially just gets to stay on the show. And I feel like I want to make another video about this with avoidance, but I feel like a lot of avoidant people don't recognize that they have I don't want to say problem, but they don't recognize that they have some things that they can work on because they don't face consequences. Because we as avoidants tell ourselves a story of like, well, I'm independent and I don't need other people and I'm fine and I'm self-sufficient and I have my own apartment or my own house and I pay my car payments and I do that all alone, and so I am so secure. And this is why a lot of avoidants just go so long being completely oblivious to the fact that they have things that they can work on and that there are positives to being interdependent and even codependent. So it just can be frustrating watching him year after year. And that brings me to point number 2 about avoidant people. We can often be completely oblivious to the fact that we have these avoidant attachment problems, and we can go through life projecting onto other people that they're the problems, that they're the reasons that things aren't working out for us, that they're the reasons that things fail. We see Miles do this a lot. It's a pattern of his where he will take an interest in a girl. He'll be talking to her for a few weeks. She comes on the show, and then after a couple times of hanging out with her, he comes up with some reason. There's some reason where he has to discontinue his connection with the girl. We've seen it with Inga. We saw it with Izzy. We've seen it with Ella. It's always that the girl has done something or she's doing something where it's not going to work because she can't fit to him. And I loved how Emily finally said something to him about this, because again, avoidance, we can be so oblivious to this. A lot of avoidant people like Miles are just going through life being completely oblivious that no, not everything, not every reason that you're having a breakdown of communication or a disconnect is because of the other person not matching up to you. You have things to work on. I have a lot of family members like this, so this is why I get so frustrated by this. But this is why it's so great when we see Emily like put her foot down and be like, Miles, I can't back you here just because you're my friend. I'm not going to blindly have your back. You know, avoidant people need the Emilys of the world. They need this feedback, because Emily essentially was like, dude, you have a pattern of doing this. You know, this girl, Ella, flew all the way across the world from you. Not because she's crazy, not because she's a bunny boiler, but because you were talking to her for 5 to 6 weeks. So you both collaborated on a plan for her to come here. And once she arrived, you started to pull away. And then you want to project this narrative that, oh, she took things too seriously. And it's like, at some point, you know, you have to learn that you're contributing to a dynamic that's leading to your own downfall, and you can't blame the other person every single time. And I loved how Emily held him accountable, because what happens with avoidance is a lot of times we don't learn our lessons because we pull away so much. We are so reclusive. We hide away from the world all the time that we don't really learn our lesson. We don't really get feedback. So that's why Miles, having his closest friend, Emily, being so frustrated with him and being so short with him and being like, no, I'm not going to back you and tell you, oh no, you're a good guy, it's okay. Like, she estimated your connection. She's like, no, like, you contributed to her being this hurt. And he's learning the consequence of his actions by having a friend that's not going to just tell him what he wants to hear and tell him that you did everything perfectly. Along with this, number 3 that I want to talk about is a lot of avoidant people feel like romance is all about looking for this perfect person. A lot of avoidant people will go years being single and just believing that one day this perfect person is just going to come into their lives and fit all of their criteria, and it's going to be magical. And so in the meantime, they'll use superficial reasoning to rule out people that they actually meet, who actually come into their lives. And we see Miles do this all the time, you know. Ella, he was talking to Ella online for weeks, but the second she was physically in his life, you know, he was like, oh, she wants a relationship. And I believe Ruby's saying she would move here in a heartbeat. And he like freaked out. He pulled away. You know, we saw him do the same with Izzy and Inga. And so essentially no one is ever good enough. It's like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. It's like, this bed is too short and this is too long and this mattress is too firm and this isn't firm enough. And that's what creates this cycle of loneliness, of isolation, of reclusiveness. And then what happens with a lot of avoidance, I don't think I struggle with this as much, but what happens with a lot of avoidance is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you overthink everything and you don't know how to just be a normal person who's dating. And the reality of dating is it's just a statistics game. You go on dates, you give people a chance, and through actual human interaction, you learn about people and you have real life experiences with people. You learn that people aren't perfect. You learn that you yourself aren't perfect. And eventually romance and connection and courtship, those things escalate and you eventually have a relationship. It's that simple. But for so many avoidant people, they just get in this cycle of overthinking things or pulling away or being so in their head or being so commitment phobic or scared to be vulnerable or let someone see them naked for the first time, or kiss someone because they're so self-conscious about the way they kiss. So it's kind of sad, especially because on the more darker end of avoidance, I know that a lot of avoidants experience limerence, extreme limerence, and really fantasize about someone that is just not with them. And that does a result to having this kind of perfection, superficial ideal of people, and closing yourself so much off from the world that you don't actually have real experiences. Which leads me to point number 4. A behavior that we see in Miles that is very common in avoidance is being attracted to people that aren't actually with you, that you can't actually be with. I found it really, really interesting that Miles went on a coffee drink/date with that girl Yasmin, who was so beautiful. And then he told her, oh, hey, I'm going to focus all my attention on Ella, this girl from Australia who's coming to visit me. And Yasmin took it so well. She's just like, okay, well, have fun. And I think the second that Miles saw that Yasmin completely didn't care, she was an emotionally mature person that's like, I went on one coffee drink with you, so I'm not emotionally attached to someone like you that I barely know. I think that made him want her more. And this happens a lot with us avoidants. We can fantasize about someone who's not with us. We've seen this little short glimpse of them, and that is comforting in some way without knowing the rest of the story about them. And with that little short glimpse of information, we project onto them this whole identity of them being this exciting, perfect person. And we just see Miles do this a lot. We saw him do it with Ella. Basically, when he was talking to her long distance, he was so excited for her to come to London and planning for her to come to London. And I think a huge part of that had to do with the fact that he hadn't met her yet. So she was still, in a lot of ways, this enigma idea that was exciting to him. And something that's interesting that we learned about Miles and some of his love interests is he was texting with them before they started talking. So with Inga and Izzy, apparently he slid into their DMs and they had like an online communication before they came onto the show. And this is a very avoidant thing, to have some sort of online companion or texting, emailing companion, because you don't have to actually do the work of that person being in your physical presence. You don't have to do the work of that person being in your actual life, being in your physical realm where you have to make a plan on a Wednesday. You don't have to rearrange your weekend to make sure that you fit that person into your schedule. When you had planned to go to the gym and you thought that your Saturday would be full of you working on your side hustle or whatnot. So that's why for so many avoidants, and I think Miles does this, it's so easy for him to get companionship just from talking to someone online who's not actually physically in his presence, who he doesn't actually have to account for and be reliable for in his schedule and his planning of his week, his month. And as long as there's this person who he's not actually with, it makes him more excited about that person. And once they're physically present in his life and he has to actually collaborate and compromise with them as an actual human being that's affecting his schedule and vice versa, he freaks out and pulls away. So all of this brings me to point number 5. I kind of got ahead of myself, but that is avoidance and long distance relationships and online companionship. So I've already said a lot about this with Miles, and he definitely exhibits this with talking to girls online and talking to girls long distance. The relationship he had with Maeva, your major love happened to live in another country. I can hold my hands up and attest that this is a situation that us avoidants find ourselves in maybe more often than most. And I think a reason that this happens is because dating, it can feel really exhausting. When you've dealt with a lot of neglect in your life, you really crave your space, your alone time, being in your room, in your apartment, in your house, in your space. And it feels like a lot of work to exit your own space that makes you so safe and comfortable and be around someone else's space, someone else's energy, someone else's patterns and habits. And that's why dating can be hard for avoidant. I know some anxiously attached people or even secure people who, when they're single, they have a bunch of dates lined up. they're swiping left and right and all over the place on Tinder, and they're going on Match.com, and they're going on, numerous dates a week, or numerous dates every 2 weeks or per month. And they're very intentional about it, and they have an outcome that they want. Whereas us avoidant people, sometimes when we're single, we can go on 1 or 2 dates in 1 month and feel so exhausted by that, feel so exhausted by leaving our apartment, getting ready, getting in our car, putting gas in the car, showing up at the place, figuring out the directions, stressing about what to pay, hoping that we connect with the person. We can feel so exhausted by all of that that we are like, okay, I'm not going on another date for another year, or another 2 years. Me, truly, I haven't been on a date in 2 years because dating just feels so exhausting, kind of committing to being around someone else even for an hour. And to go back to what I said about avoidance seeking perfection, because we isolate ourselves so much and we want to meet the perfect person, sometimes we'll go on a date and we'll feel so disappointed, like this overwhelming disappointment and dejected and defeated because the person wasn't perfect. And we feel, we go into that all or nothing thinking of like, well, there's no point in dating. Like, what's the point? Like, this is worthless. It's not worth my time. I don't feel like doing this. And that's why we can go so long being single for so many years. And so that's why I think we can find ourselves in these situations where we have an online companion, because we don't actually have to do the work of like exiting our safe space in our apartment or our house or a room to actually meet someone. With very little effort, we can connect with someone and get that companionship. The one thing that I will say though, to just give Miles a little bit of grace, is when you are talking to someone online or dating someone online, you're not in their physical presence. So when you actually meet them, you take for granted how much being in someone's physical space affects the strength of an attraction. And I've experienced this numerous times. There will be times where, you're talking to someone online for weeks or months, and then when you finally meet them, it's like, oh, you guys don't have great kissing chemistry, or they take everything seriously in person, but they seemed a little bit more funny and chill online, or maybe they, it can be little things like maybe they breathe funny, or maybe they're hyper OCD about contamination and it drives you crazy. There's just so many things that you can't predict when you haven't met someone in person. So that's the only place where I want to give Miles some runway to, to have like backed out on the situation. And maybe he didn't have the words to communicate like, oh, there's some, things about you that I don't want to say to hurt your feelings, but kind of got under my skin or annoyed me, like that happens. But then the other thing about that with avoidance is, well, if you're constantly seeking an online companion or seeking a companion with someone that's not physically in your life, then you're always going to run into these roadblocks where someone's not going to be perfect enough for you. And so the best way to get out of these situations is to just give people a chance and keep giving people chances and listen to feedback and learn about yourself and evolve as a person, and recognize that you as an avoidant person and me as an avoidant person, we always have things that we can work on. We all, avoidant or not, have things that we can work on. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, particularly if you are a fan of reality TV, Made in Chelsea, Married at First Sight. Still haven't watched it, but maybe I will after this whole thing with Ella Mayding. But that's going to conclude this video. Let me know if you have any video suggestions of what you want me to talk about. Any issues going on in your life with an avoidant person in your life. Maybe you're avoidant yourself and you want me to talk about a certain thing. Let me know in the comments below. If you have maybe a more intimate thing that you don't feel like commenting, you don't feel safe to comment, feel free to message me on Instagram. And I'm happy to listen to or read your message and perhaps make a video about that. So I really appreciate you being here today, and I hope that you have a great day. Thank you again. Also give this video a like. Thank you so much.